So from our previous okay, so having look at Bowie State's policy summarily, the regulatory authority for Bowie State policy. Okay, so Bowie State did not just wake up to design the policy; it's an institution under the University System of Maryland (USM). So by USM Standard 2.1. All USM institutions, including Bowie State, of which UMUG is a sister school, must develop acceptable use policy. This policy is required to address institutional computing resources. Okay, so you should mention different computing resources on campus, including the network, the email, the laptops, loan, the software, copyright, and all computing infrastructure on campus. Uh, the USM standard also require that this policy must address the responsibility of users. Okay, for Bowie State now, the faculty, the staff, the stakeholders in this regard, as well as the vendors, even though the vendors was not mentioned in the policy, but I feel this is important, and that's going to be part of the critique for this for the policy. It should address the issues of copyright and infringement as well. That's the requirement of the USM. So that's important. That's the dictate of USM. Okay, so let's look at the importance of this AUP. Okay, I mean, it's obvious that it guides both the users and the organization or the employer. Okay, as a user, you know what is acceptable, what is inappropriate. Okay, we are also being protected. The employer will be protected from inappropriate use of their network or computing infrastructure, and as well they'll be protected from liability if this dictate is put in the policy. Okay, it also provides emphasis on how to access the internet, and it's also a means of legal protection for the employer. For the school system, for Bowie State, for instance, it protects Bowie State. When we look at Bowie State's policy, for instance, it's already mentioned what is acceptable use and what is in acceptable use. So for this, Bowie State is protecting themselves, okay, from any of these uses. Okay, it's a faculty and students of BSU shall use. These are the uses that is acceptable. Any usage outside this is inappropriate, and that's why it has stated here. And in the policy, it's also stated in here that the fact that a particular inappropriate use is not mentioned does not mean that the policy does not cover that action. He said an action is not necessarily acceptable simply because it may not be explicitly restricted here. Okay, that's a clause for Bowie State to protect itself from inappropriate use of its computing infrastructure. Now let's look at the expectation from users. Okay, this is also stated in the policy. We just went over it. It expects all users of Bowie State network infrastructure to only use them for authorized purposes that supports BSU mission, goals, and priorities. Okay, they should use them to access their individual files and publicly available file, or those they have been authorized to obtain. Users only operate legal versions of copyrighted software. That's true. In fact, on Bowie campus, on BSU campus, you cannot install non-copyrighted software because the BSU home computers are password protected. Okay, so you need the IT department to install those software for you if you want to use Bowie State computer. The Wi-Fi itself is also password protected. Okay, it used to be free, it used to be open to all, but now it's password protected. So these are ways to make those expectations from users, what is expected from users, and it's also stated in the policy as well. So when users are on BSU network infrastructure, or they should be considerate of their use of shared resources, and they should refrain from monopolizing online time or printer paper. This is mainly with the computer labs on campus. Okay, so I just showed that to you in the policy. This link is to take you to the policy that I've shown you. Now, when we already know acceptable use policy has to do with binding contract, and it's written, and then when it's written, then there'll be, it's written, is signed, is sealed, and it's binding on the parties. In Bowie State environment, is not signed, but mostly acceptable use policy needs to be signed by all parties. But in Bowie State, it's only signed by some stakeholders, like the president, the university councils, but we can't have each of the faculty to sign it. So the faculty senate sign it, but it's presented to all faculty, okay, through it, and staff and students as well, through a town hall meeting. So you see, each one tell each, so everyone is aware of the acceptable use policy, and once it's signed by the faculty senate, the president, the university council, and presented in the town hall meeting, is binding. So the policy does not contain, but as regards the consequences for violation, let's look at the policy again. The policy does not expressly mention the consequences for violation, but when we look at the individual policies in Bowie State, okay, which as time goes on, when we look at the limitation, will be part of the limitation, but individual, some of these policies mention those consequences, but this should have been included as well in the acceptable use policy. So the consequences, as beautiful as the policy is, despite all this expectation from end users, then what happens when end user violates this expectation? It's not expressly stated in that policy. So that leads us to the limitation of BSU AUP. Okay, we don't know the originator, unlike that of the UMUG that I show you. We know where this is coming from. Okay, but Bowie State on AUP is silent about that. It was in the course of research that I saw that, like I showed you earlier, that for all USM institutions, well, they are required to have acceptable use policy, but you can't find this information in Bowie State AUP. The enforcement agency is not clearly stated, though it's mentioned HR, on the EO, the department dean, but on how this agency we carry out this enforcement is not expressly. There's too much discrepancy in that. The policy does not provide link to other related policies, unlike what we saw with UMUs and another policy. You can see this is the policy, there is no link. Okay, it was when I researched further, searching the website, that I came across all these other policies, but it was never mentioned anywhere that these policies are related to the acceptable use policy of the institution, and it's never even linked to them as well. So it's not applicable to external users. I mean, as a user on campus, I know there are so many external users who use the network infrastructure, like the Wi-Fi, the computers, practice. Students come here come to Bowie State for practice or external exam, but the acceptable use policy specifically mentioned its applicability is limited to staff, faculty, and students. So what happened to those external users? How will the institution protect themselves in case of breach of the network infrastructure by this external user? As a user on campus, my observation has been the departments do provide agreement form for these users to sign, to state that they will abide by the BSU network infrastructure policy, but this is not mentioned in the acceptable use policy. The policy does not have sufficient information about security and privacy. The policy does not, it's not currently applicable, does not have currently applicable information. Really, when you look at it, it's outdated because it was last revised in 1998, and information technology has moved past some of the content mentioned here. We're talking about cryptography, intrusion detection, applied cryptography, the activities of hackers, and computer usage has gone beyond some of the requirements or the standards stated here. So it's imperative that this policy be reviewed and updated. Like I mentioned there, the last revision was in 1998. Okay. And then the legal disclaimer, releasing the university from responsibility of any illegal or otherwise inappropriate usage is not included. And these are the recent components in acceptable use policy. I'm sure that's not included because that policy was last reversed in a long time. Okay, the scope is also limited, so it needs to be reviewed and to list all these other policies, technology policy that the university has. Okay, yes, that's a limitation. And then the yeah, another thing that is missing, another aspect that is missing, is that it's a limitation. It's just make the policy to be on a disadvantage. Is the fact that it doesn't have sanction. As beautiful as the policy, it's provided on what constitutes acceptable use, inappropriate use. Then what happened in case of all this inappropriate use? The sanction section is missing from the policy. And looking at the policy again, I'm going to bring it to us again, even though it has the definition section. But there are so many technical terms in here and so many IT security terms in the policy that should have been defined. Okay, and even some acronyms in the policy should have been defined in the definition, but just a definition none. No, it can be none. Okay, so it's important is reviewed. There are so many contents in the policy that can be defined and not have the definition as none that we currently have. Okay, so we're looking at some tips and recommendations for teachers. So for teachers or faculty, okay, what are tips that can help them to implement AUP? Okay, so teachers should work with IT department to create acceptable use agreement. Like look at the Bowie State acceptable use policy, for instance. It doesn't have an agreement section, so teachers can make this happen. And even in the elementary school as well, or middle or high school, this can be done as well. The students should also sign the agreement. Teachers should ensure that students sign the agreement. They should have students read the agreement. They should give quizzes on this agreement. And one thing I do in my classes, for instance, I give quizzes on syllabus. I call it syllabus quiz. The same way teachers can incorporate this AUP into their curriculum. It's not just going to take more than 30 minutes of their lessons and then give quizzes on this. It's important. They also teach internet and security and associated risks. Okay, they should, at least at the elementary level. Okay, and they should help students acquire skills to be responsible. So topic of internet security should be included in the curriculum. Students should know what constitutes inappropriate use of computer technology. They should also discuss the need for safety and privacy, as well as danger and all the online threats and danger with students. Okay, awareness is very important. So doing all of this, teachers can help to create awareness as regard implementation of AUP. Now, tips again for teachers to protect themselves. Yeah, the other tips is how they can help with implementing AUP. How do they protect themselves as well? As school employees, is important. As a teacher should read the AUP. Okay, it's not enough to have the student read it. They also should read it. They should follow the contents of the document. They also should abide by those terms of the AUP. They should participate in training and discussions on the AUP. Okay, they should. It's important for teacher as well to have an ongoing discussion on the safety and privacy, as well as the dangerous and other inappropriate activities online. Okay, talking about cyberbullying, identity theft, on e-commerce crime, and so many other activities, illicit activities taking place online. Okay, so it's important. The recommendation as well that there could be committees on this where teachers can participate. They can have these discussions with their students as well. Okay, and even in teachers meetings, these kind of discussions can take place, and that way the teachers themselves are becoming aware, and their self-awareness as an employees, and that way